Okay, welcome everybody. I hope you're enjoying Ignite. If you're like me, you're wearing your most comfortable shoes and your thickest socks, and you have your Fitbit on so that you can track how much you're walking. Welcome to what is actually the second of a series of learning path sessions that we're doing to help people really start to understand the breadth of the Microsoft 365 developer platform. I'm a little surprised. I'm not used to talking in front of crowds quite this large about developer stuff, because typically when we come to Ignite, it's a bit of a smaller story. So this year, it's actually super gratifying to see this many people show up and listen to sessions about Microsoft Graph. I know that Yina Arenas had a session yesterday that was absolutely packed. I know that if you went to that session, we're going to cover some of that same ground again. So if you get bored, I apologize. Hopefully we're putting a bit of a new spin on it. But this is a topic that I'm pretty passionate about. And I want to make sure that we get as much of you engaged with the graph as possible. So today we're going to go over, I'd say, 3 core things that I want you to walk away with about the Microsoft Graph. And the reason that this is important is because over the last couple of years that I've been working with the Microsoft Graph engineers, et cetera, I really get 3 big questions, right? I get this question about, what is the Microsoft Graph? It seems very hard to get your arms around, and it's very abstract. So I want to make sure that you guys have a sense of that. The second question is sort of, where do I get started? Where are the docs? What are the tools that I need? What are the sort of the core fundamental things that I need to have in order to become more familiar with the graph when I want to go start coding? And then the third piece, it seems kind of like fluff, but it's actually not, because the other thing is the graph is so big and it has so many things inside of it that a lot of people actually need some inspiration, right? They need to know what they can do to combine all the different things in the graph together to build these sort of Microsoft 365 apps that you'll hear people talk about. Like you probably heard Mike Amerlon talk about that if you went to the first Learning Path session. So that's sort of the outline of the day today. And we'll go through it by, I think, starting a little bit of a story, right? So I was watching everybody file in here, and I wanted to sort of see how many people could help actually remember the year 1990. Because I think I've boiled the entire history of the year of 1990 down into 3 important things to make it easy for you guys. The first thing that happened in 1990 was that with the Berlin Wall just having come down in November of the previous year, the Soviet Union fell apart. So there's this great unbundling, right, of nations to the east. The second thing that happened was that a guy named Tim Berners-Lee wrote a proposal for what would become the World Wide Web. And then the third thing that happened, and maybe there's somebody here in the room that knows this, the third thing that happened in 1990 was that another bundle was born. Does anybody want to guess what that was? Not Windows NT, but I think you might have said it. Yes, that's right, Office 1.0, right? And if you remember Office 1.0, does anybody here remember Office 1.0? Because I was a freshman in college. Office 1.0 was a bundle. It was a marketing bundle, right? It was actually just a bundle of disks that you got in a box. And 3.5-inch floppy disks that you would sit in front of your x86 PC and you'd chuck them into the hard drive one by one, and you'd wait for the disk to finish reading. And when it was done, you had Word, Excel, and PowerPoint and Mail, I believe, actually installed on your desktop machine, right? But it almost seems hard to believe, right? Those are quaint. I don't know that I could go and find a 3.5-inch floppy disk. I might find it in like a junk store or something like this at this point, right? Because, the impact of that paper, right, the Tim Berners-Lee paper, and I think he is now Sir Tim Berners-Lee, right? It was amazing. It was profound, right? The world of programs that used to be copied onto floppy disks, it just evaporated, right? In my lifetime, it evaporated and gave way to a world connected by all these huge wired and wireless networks and data centers, right? Now there were these enormous data centers, like this is one of ours right here, that allowed the distribution of software and of programs at an unimaginable scale, right? At a scale that was so big and so vast. I think if you were really old school, you'd say, well, it's not a new term. It was an old SS7 telco term, but they called it the cloud, right? It just became this huge thing. And that meant that we could start to rethink the way that we built Microsoft Office. It was not just a paradigm shift that allowed us to, for example, distribute and install software in a new way. It actually allowed us to sort of take the opportunity to look at all the data that was created by that and harness it to start building these intelligent cloud-based services that connected everybody not just to a device, but across devices. And so Office, which, as everybody knows, forever was released in 3-year waves, gave way to Office 365, which became a service that was released in what we called ripples instead of waves, and meant that you had now access to a constantly up-to-date, constantly innovation-driven, and constantly more intelligent, cloud-based platform. Now, of course, this also meant that that sort of marketing constraint of Office 365 was a thing that we could look beyond, and we could start connecting a lot of other things to it. And so it was that we started to think about creating this sort of super suite of applications of really iconic stuff, right? So we put, Office 365 as a starter, but then also Microsoft, Windows 10 Professional in there, and our EMS suite in there. We connect all these things up, and I admit originally it was a marketing construct, but today these are actually things that are all wired together. If you look in the Microsoft Graph, there is absolutely a ton of Intune endpoints in there, I promise you. But if you look at all of this now, these are one great big sort of super bundle of things that we offer, and really what they do now is they look at your identity and they provide you with the assistive tools that you need to be more productive. They help you manage these experiences across all kinds of devices, and they wrap that up in a sort of a package of compliance and security that's really world class. And the data set that drives all this stuff, that's what we call the Microsoft Graph. So that's my sort of introduction story, and it's also a quick 30-year history of Microsoft Office. So let's pause for just a second, right? And let's just set a definition so that you guys can say, hey, the first bullet point that guy put on the slide, I think I know what that is now. The definition that I would give you is that Microsoft Graph is the Microsoft 365 data that describes the patterns of productivity, identity, and security in an organization accessed through, and this is important, a single unified API endpoint. Okay. So the next point that I want to make about the Microsoft Graph that's, I think, really important, especially if you're a developer, is that we use this to power our stuff, right? Our products are fundamentally Office 365, Microsoft 365, fundamentally powered by the Microsoft Graph. And it's important for you to recognize that if you're a dev, because honestly, it means that these are scalable products. These are things that are tested against a base of 200 million people that use Microsoft 365 every day. These are not things that we're going to walk away from because we're building our own product on it. So let me just give you a few examples of the sort of the everyday way in which we use Microsoft Graph, because I think you don't necessarily notice it. So you've probably noticed if you use 365 that when you click on an email, the first thing that happens is that it predicts who it is that you're going to send that email to. That, as a matter of fact, is being driven by the Microsoft Graph. It also knows, for example, that if you start typing a person's name in, that it's going to drop down a list of alphabetized names, but that alphabetization, I think that's the way you say it, is actually prioritized by the way that you work, the patterns of Jeremys, for example, that I know. The Jeremy that I work with most frequently, not necessarily the one that's alphabetized. But the thing that's also cool about that, because that could run anywhere on any machine, is that that identical process is being run if I look for Jeremys on my iOS device, or if I look at Jeremys in Teams, and again, on a mobile device. Or even if I'm in a document, like if I'm working within the context or within the surface of a document like Word, I can @mention Jeremy. I get that same list of Jeremys. And by the way, I can also fire off an email to Jeremy telling them that I've mentioned him in something, and he will get notification and be able to respond to that just through the surface of Word. So in all of these different places, in all of these different contexts, the same experience can take place because it's being powered by this Microsoft Graph intelligence that's built into the cloud. Files are another place where you see the Microsoft Graph. So for example, when you log into your Office.com portal, you get a list of most recently used files, and that list of most recently used files is, of course, not dependent upon anything other than the Microsoft Graph. So if I, for example, want to attach a file in my email client in Outlook on my mobile phone, I once again get that exact same list of files. So no matter where I go, these devices are following me as a user, or these experiences, I should say, are following me as a user and not my device or anything else. Now, files and people are very, I guess, transactional data points. The reality about the Microsoft Graph is that there's absolutely phenomenal amounts of data in it, and that data can also be used to build richer sort of insight and analytics apps. So, us, canonically, we build this thing called My Analytics, unsurprisingly. So our data scientists are taking graph data and they're crunching it up so that they can look at, for example, how much focus time I have to actually get my work done, or how much well-being I have. Really, I think what this is about is my work-life balance. I probably wish I had more purple on there. But then the other thing is, how much is my network growing and how am I maintaining relationships with my colleagues, not just immediately in that inner circle, but by the time you get out under the number 849, that's how many people I worked with over the last 12 months, which is actually, I think it's probably a lot of people, but that's life in a company with 100,000 employees, right? So all of these different Microsoft Graph experiences that I've just showed you are really focused around one idea, and that idea is that there's a user at the center of every single experience. And we do actually call these things, user-centered experiences, but it's not just a marketing construct, because when you look at the actual API itself and you look at the namespace of the API, one of the things that you'll notice is that there is a me namespace built right into the graph. And so, yeah, that's me in the middle of that in my severe dad mode right there, but it is, in fact, my profile picture. But yes, so if I wanted to actually, find very, very simple queries that I would go into the Graph Explorer, which I'll show you guys a little bit later, and start addressing it, I would see that fundamental to the HTTP calls that I'm making is this idea that me, or that a user, is really at the root of every call that I make, right? So my events, my files, my rooms in a building. And even if you go to more complex queries, right, this concept that we build into everything, this concept of being user-centric or group-centric or person-centric, is really ultimately at the heart of what we want people to be doing with the Microsoft Graph. And let the devices do what they may. So, now we just talked a little bit about users, but the other point I want to make is about data sets. There are, of course, super popular data sets, right? These are the ones that I don't think anybody in here in the room would be surprised to see. These are the highest value data sets in terms of where people actually work every day. But, mail and conversations and calendars and people, those are really the things that we do expect and we do see people working with the most. But because this is Microsoft 365, you should keep in mind that there are dozens, hundreds, thousands of data sets behind this API endpoint. Is it an absolute one-for-one match with everything that we have in the 30-year legacy that I just walked you guys through in 4 minutes? We're getting there. But it is, however, an extremely comprehensive way to access the Microsoft 365 data. So, to summarize, right, all these experiences, all these different things that we build with the Microsoft Graph, these are experiences that really bind together our platform, but I wouldn't say that any of one of those things is necessarily, in your face. These are all things that you do in a day-to-day basis that are collectively, sometimes they're pretty subtle. Sometimes you don't even notice, like the little thing with email predicting who you're going to drop an email into. But when you think about all of these different experiences in aggregate, they're incredibly powerful. Okay, so I think that closes off the section about sort of what is the graph. Let's start talking now about how to get started actually playing around with and learning the Microsoft Graph. So the first thing we're going to do is just a quick demo. I think that probably there's no better way to actually give you more like a hands-on tour of the Microsoft Graph than to show you Graph Explorer. I expect some of you guys in Yina's session saw this yesterday, so I will try to point out some of the things that I particularly like about it, and I'll try not to touch my microphone too much. Hold on a second while things warm up here on my machine. As you can see, maybe the network is a little slow. Let's just do this. Let's reload and go to here. So if you go to graph.microsoft.com, this is sort of home base for all things graph. And boy, that is not the way the network is supposed to be behaving today. Anyway, so there is, in theory, this page that's going to magically appear here. And on this page, there is going to be this tool that's really cool that shows you all this stuff. I'm wondering if we shouldn't be hardwired or something like that. Oh, hey, look at that. There we go. I just did a lean over it. Anyway, so you can tap on Graph Explorer, and you come to this page that really is a front end for accessing the Microsoft Graph. Now, I guess I would say a couple things. This is a sandbox, right? You can play around with this any way that you want, and you can do certain things, but if you hover over, for example, gets, and you try to change that to post or put or anything else, you can't do it in the sandbox environment because we don't want you messing up our data set. Likewise, you could also come over here and you could sign in with your corporate ID. Again, we don't want you doing that either because we don't want you messing up your production environment. What we actually really want you to do is to sign into the Microsoft Graph using some fun demo account, and at Microsoft, that fun demo account belongs to, yes, you guessed it, Megan Bowen. And once you've got Megan, you can see that we have all these different queries that you can play with, and you can, for example, get, let's say, all the events in Megan's calendar, right? And what you're getting is a JSON representation of all that, and let's nail this back a little bit just so that we can get subjects only, and you can actually read it. So you can see if I zoom in here that I've got a bunch of different meetings on my calendar. I can also very, very quickly, let's go back to here, look at the documentation for this, right? So I can click over here and I can immediately find out all the things that I need to know, and particularly some important things like permissions. One of the questions that I always get from people is, I'm trying to write this query and it seems like it's failing and I don't think that the permissions are set right. Yes, you can go in and look at the data, but there's a new version of the Graph Explorer out, right? So now, if you come up to the top of the Graph Explorer and you hit this little button, we just announced the release of this. Any of you guys must have seen this yesterday with Yina. If you did, the thing that I really love about this personally is that the permissions thing, for example, if I do that same, let's just say my profile, right? If I do that same thing, I can now display those permissions right away in here. I don't have to go bounce around for the documentation. And oh, by the way, if I need to consent to more permissions rather than digging around and trying to figure out where to do that in my profile, I can consent right from within the query, and it makes it so much easier, right? There are other cool things, right? So I get the auth token here. And then if you look down here, I can also, for example, see what this information would look like if I was going to display this in an adaptive card. And then I can also get snippets based on what platform I'm working on, right? So there is this idea that we build a truly cross-platform experience. So we do try to get the biggies, right? We get C#, we get JavaScript, Java, and Objective-C, and those snippets are all available for this exact call right here within the body of Graph Explorer. Question in the front, and we'll just take a few questions because it's a big room and a long talk. Yeah. I think the answer is it's going to depend because there are sometimes independent permissions for different, permissions for different servers that are managed by different admin experiences. So, let's talk about that later because when we get into the permission stuff, it gets a little complicated. So I want to make sure that we don't go down that hole before we get along with the rest of this. Okay. So anyway, so the Graph Explorer then, if I were to look at this, actually contains information on all kinds of different endpoints, right? So you can see that there are absolutely, dozens upon dozens of different sample queries in here, and you can run them. In addition to this, it sort of becomes home base for the queries that you want to write and test yourself. So if you are writing queries against the graph and you want to test them in an environment before you start putting them into your code, this is definitely the place to come try it and make sure that you're getting the responses back that you expect to get. It will also, for example, help you make sure that you understand the permissions, et cetera, that you need to have in order for that thing to go smoothly. So it's really, I think, one of the critical tools that you need to have. And it's I mean, it's just a website, right? So you can go to graph.microsoft.com and bookmark this and know that that's a place that you're going to go to. And we actually have, I mean, tens or maybe hundreds of thousands of people hitting it every month. It's a highly, highly trafficked website. All right, so let's go back to the deck for a second and move on. Okay, so app development, right? We tend to think just broadly about sort of a continuum of development. We offer, you can use the Microsoft Graph to power a certain number of low-code apps, Flow, for example, but there are also reference solutions that we build. So we're increasingly starting to offer on GitHub a number of solutions that are prepackaged, where I think the idea is that we want you to take these as examples, and then you can customize them as much or as little as you'd like. They're generally things that need a certain amount of spit and polish, but the idea is that they put together a lot of things that we want you to try out for yourself. And then obviously there is the full do-it-yourself custom development thing. But the apps that we want you to build really fall into sort of two categories. And when we think about the Microsoft Graph in particular, we think about connecting two things. One, how you extend your experiences into hours. And right now that's primarily being done by connectors and by search, where you can actually go ahead and you can tag your data, you can put it into our APIs and, for example, make it searchable through our first-party experiences. There are also other points in the graph that are extensible as well, but this is something that strategically is a direction that we are going in, and if you think about our blogs or anything that we've been writing about or the direction you've been hearing from our executives, the extensibility of the graph and the extension of those first-party experiences is something that's important to us. The other side of it is that we know that you can bring our data out into the experiences that you build, which is to say that you can bring Microsoft Graph data into the websites that you build or the bots that you want to power or the daemon apps that you're building. It's really your choice. So whether you want to bring data through the Microsoft Graph into our experiences or you want to bring data from the Microsoft Graph into your experiences, you can sort of have it both ways, and increasingly so over the next couple of years. Open platforms, I mentioned in the snippets section, and I'm just going to sort of fly through this slide just a little bit, that we support all the big platforms. So if you're a .NET developer, or you're working for Android or Apple devices, or just building web pages with JavaScript, or now we have PowerShell, and that is a very new SDK, by the way. That is a little raw, it's a little beta, but it's something that a lot of people have asked for, so definitely go out there, definitely play with it. There's a session by a guy named Daryl Miller, which I think already has about 800 people signed up for it, so if you want to jostle your way into that session, that is something that you can do. Or you can find Daryl at the booths, and he will be happy to talk with you about this. But PowerShell is something that's been super duper in demand, and so that's an SDK that we're putting a lot of effort into right now. We also have, generally speaking, quick starts, generally speaking, tutorials for all of these things. I'm going to show you a quick start in a little bit. The tutorial for that is about an hour long. It's very good. We're trying to catch up and make sure that we have these kind of references across all the different platforms that we support. The tier 2 stuff, the PHP, the Ruby, the Python stuff, we continue to work on that. I don't think those are quite as robust as the tier 1 SDKs that I show up here. But you will, in fact, find that we support pretty much every major thing. And if there's other things you want us to support, we've got user voice for that and Daryl to build out the SDKs. So let's do a very quick demo, and let's hope that the network holds up as well. Let me go over here. And is that the right one? Get over to Visual Studio. There we go. Okay, so one of the things that you can do on the same Microsoft Graph homepage is that you can actually run quick starts. And we try to put these things together so that you can actually build a program in 3 to 5 minutes. I'm going to skip probably one step, and it's going to be the most boring step, which is where I unzip a file and put it on my hard drive so that I can actually put the solution together for you in Visual Studio. So you can dock me 30 seconds for that or whatever it is. But as you can see, there's this process where you say, okay, build an app, and anybody can do this, and we're going to do the ASP.NET app. And if I go down here, all I need to do is get an app ID and a secret. It takes care of all the Azure Active Directory app registration for me. It goes through that portal. All I need is a Microsoft account. So whether it's my school account, my personal account, that is my personal account. Don't anybody email me in that account. Anyway, so you just need a Microsoft authentication account, and then you need to and it'll create this ID. So smash cut right into what you actually wind up getting is it combines the app secret with the package that it downloads for you, puts the two things together, and you can open those up. So let me just pop into Visual Studio where I actually have the graph tutorial installed. And if we look at the controller here, let's see, come on, controller, there we go, the calendar controller, you can see that it's a really simple file. All we're basically doing is going to call my calendar. We're going to do three things. We're going to authenticate, we're going to call my calendar, and if we need to, we're going to re-authenticate and reacquire a token, because if it expires, because we've been sitting around too long, we're going to need to do that to keep things running. So I'm making this call right here. Let's see, and if I just pop this open, you can see in the graph helper file exactly what I just said. You can see that I'm getting my bearer token up here, right here, right? And then you come down a little bit further, you can see that I'm making my call to the Microsoft Graph. I'm asynchronously grabbing some data from the calendar, and then down here you can see I'm actually I've got this just in case things expire down here bit. So that's it, and if I let it run, I'm assuming at this point that I've authenticated, but I don't know, and I'm assuming as well that the network will actually treat us well. So, all right, I'm going to hold my breath until this happens. No, I'm not. I can't remember because I was playing around with this in the speaker room before I actually came out here, but the idea, while you're staring at a blank screen, is that if I've already authenticated, it will recognize that I'm Megan, but oh, look at that, I didn't have to stall anymore. So I can click here to sign in, and that's effectively now I have a token, and you can see that, oh, briefly it wanted to know that I was Megan, and now it should just show my calendar. And you can see that this is the list of events that I have. So it's that easy, right, to build an app, and you can see that I have a bunch of stuff, and actually there are a few things I'm going to point out. There's a misspelled word called project later. We're going to probably look at these things as we go through different stuff, so you might see that word pop up in different places as I sort of show you how we play around with this. But that is effectively the best way to quickly build an app, and I think that probably did take me about 3 minutes to do all of that. So there are, I think, about 10 quick starts that you can play around with in whatever the language of your choice is, and for the most part, there's also a pretty detailed tutorial. We have an MVP named Andrew Connell who does a lot of fabulous work for us. Andrew did the quick start, at least for this one, and it's an hour of your time that's very well spent when you really want to unpack everything that is in this particular program. Okay, so that's the quick start. Let me click back over. Okay, so say you already have stuff and you just want to put graph into it really fast. You may have heard yesterday about the graph toolkit. You may even have come down to the hub floor and seen a grown man in a giraffe costume talking about the graph toolkit. If you want to talk with him more, he's pretty easy to spot. His name is Nicola. You can talk to him. So the Graph Toolkit is this sort of framework-agnostic set of web components that we've built. And the thing that's really cool about these, right, is that we've taken these super everyday scenarios, and we've done three things, right? We've solved essentially for authentication so that you can put these things into your program very, very easily without having to do all the authentication work yourself. The second point is that we have wired graph to them all. And then the third point is that we've bound them to a UX, and in this point, it's actually a Fabric UI UX. So it's the sort of the standard Microsoft elements for UX that automatically come with it. And you can see these are just like snippets of the various different experiences. I think there are 8 or 9 of them right now that are generally available. There are a few more that are actually in beta. We're also taking requests, so if there are other things that people want to see us do, we'll certainly weigh those as we sort of map out all the different things that we want to do. But the idea then is that you can very, very, very quickly insert graph-powered experiences into your web pages, right? Or into your SharePoint sites, or into your tasks, or into your teams. And the next demo that I want to do is really a way of showing you just how easy that winds up being and how fully functional these are the second, really, that you light them up. So let's flip back over to the demo machine and swipe. Okay. All right, so I've got VS Code loaded on one side, and I've got live server running, and essentially a web page on the other side. And if you look at the code, you can see how incredibly simple this is to just build this very thing. Now, the point here is not to build a beautifully rendered web page. The point here is to actually show you how quickly I can put a Microsoft Graph Toolkit component onto this page. There are basically two things going on here that I need to do. The first thing is that I'm referencing this script, right, that you can see up here. And the second thing is that I just need to reference a Microsoft Graph Toolkit part. So for example, let's say, pick a task. Let's say, let's do, Microsoft Graph Toolkit dash tasks, right? Boom. Save it. And just like that, right, I now have tasks popped up in here. And if I go and look, so I can actually add a task, right? This is a completely, let's see, send flowers. It is, by the way, my wife's 50th birthday today, which is both an indication of why I shouldn't be here and why I'm writing this thing up. Let's see. Let's do this without fumbling around too much. Today is 11/05/2019. I can assign this task to myself. It's weird to call myself Megan, but it happens. And I can actually assign this task to myself. And then if I go back here and I look at my tasks, right, this is actually my tasks, you can see that I have, through that, that web part, that thing that took me 2 seconds to add, now actually have live information flowing through the platform, and I've just updated the tasks that are actually there in my 365 portal. I can also complete a task. I think if I just do complete there, and I go back here and I refresh this, I should see that those tasks are gone now. Okay, it's going to paint. Yeah, so those tasks are now gone. So this is actually, in the matter of just seconds, right? This is me putting a web part into a web page that references the graph, that references the graph, that takes care of authentication, and is absolutely 100% functional with nothing else, right? It's really, really a nice way to do this. And interestingly enough, I don't know, did anybody here attend the pre-day that we had on Sunday? If you did, you saw a program that we had built, which will be one of the templates, actually, that we offer, where we used the Microsoft Graph Toolkit for a whole number of different functions. And we saved, I would say, 3 weeks of development time just by using these components as opposed to doing custom dev around all of this stuff ourselves. So it was a really, really nice thing to have. And we're starting to see, for example, some guys that are saying, yeah, I put the toolkit stuff in 20 minutes in my program. So it's a huge time saver. So if you've got something out there and you want a place to get started and you want to use one of these experiences, I would totally recommend doing this. And I would also recommend giving us feedback so that we can continue to produce these kind of parts and move them into generally availability so that we can help you guys get them going. All right, so that is the toolkit, and let me flip back over to my deck. All right, analytics apps. This is the third thing you guys should know about in the sort of space of starting your own apps. We do actually have a way now to extract data at scale out of the Microsoft Graph. It's called Data Connect. And everything we've talked about up to this point, and this is very similar to what I was telling you about in the beginning, these are the transactional things. These are files and people, et cetera, et cetera. But we know that a lot of people now are looking for really rich information about their organizations, kind of like the My Analytics tool that we bought. So we make that same data set available to people to build their own analytics on top of. I would say right now that, I have to confirm, honestly, that not all the data sets in Microsoft 365 are available, but many of the very popular data sets, the one that I showed you early on, many of those data sets actually are available through Graph Data Connect, and it allows you to build not only deep insight apps, but it combines that data through Azure Data Factory and Azure Tools with your third-party data. So it's not just stuff that you put together with Microsoft. It's data that can be combined in all kinds of interesting ways. And this is where we start to actually transition a little bit to the, how do I inspire you to go out and build apps like this? So we put a video together about one of the partners that actually started to build with Microsoft Graph Data Connect right about the time that we announced its general availability. And the partner was called Talentsoft. They're a big company out of Paris. They work on HR software. And in one of the few moments in IT where my life actually, intersected with glamorous stuff, we did a story about how they built a solution for, or about to launch a solution with Christian Dior that's built around Graph Data and Microsoft Graph Data Connect. So give me a second here to start that video up for you guys. I think I have to go back to the demo machine to make this happen. It's a quick one, so I'll let you guys watch it, but it's pretty cool.
Talentsoft is the European leader of cloud-based talent management and learning software. We are working with Dior, designing an entire new way to recruit and manage highly creative individuals. It's fully based on Microsoft technology.
Dior is one of the most recognized luxury brands in the world. The fashion industry moves so quickly, we need to be very agile so that we can really lead the change in the fashion business. My biggest challenge is to nurture creative individuals and to help them work together as a team.
Microsoft Graph Data Connect allows us to get data at scale and to identify skills and collaboration patterns across employees within an organization. We are going to use AI machine learning plus data from Microsoft Graph Data Connect to build new teams.
Technology and fashion are two different universes. When we bring them together, it's very exciting. The future for me is to leverage all those data from Microsoft Graph to create even more opportunities for Dior.
Thanks to Microsoft, this technology is going to help foster collaboration, discovering talents, and support the work of this iconic brand.
The future at Dior is exciting for me because we have the ability to continue to develop all these talented people working with so much passion for Dior.
Talentsoft is the
Okay. All right, so you get it, right? There is this way in which you can take this data and you can do really amazing things with it. I have to admit, like these guys, they have a number of customers lined up for this now, and I'll actually be talking to them pretty soon. But the idea is that they sort of saw the potential of all of this data and really jumped on the opportunity to do something that was really different and really unusual and not just transactional. But, I mean, aspirationally, that's a great place to be. I think there's a lot of other ways for you guys to find inspiration, so I want to make sure that you guys know where to look, and it's not just looking at my fancy video, because I don't get to make a video like that but once in a career. So I want to make sure you guys know that, for example, we have a whole sort of inventory of partners that we sort of evaluate, and we look at the stuff that they're doing on the graph.com website. So if you go to graph.microsoft.com, there's a partner list of partners from across the Microsoft spectrum who've done interesting things with Microsoft Graph. In any case, you can always go and look for those guys that we've sort of hand-selected and see what it is that they're doing and see ways in which they're doing it. You can also go to AppSource and look at our productivity apps and that sort of whole family of different things that we do there. But I wanted to actually take one last opportunity to do a demo of one of the partner solutions that I personally, I like the best. I think it's one of my favorite apps. There's sort of three things that I think about with this. One is that I think that they've addressed something that's sort of a canonical work problem, which is meeting management, right? Everybody has meetings and everybody has gotten that blank come to my meeting invite in Outlook. The second is that they really hit on all these different endpoints on the Microsoft Graph. So if you look at the sort of the salad of logos down at the bottom, you can see Outlook and Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive and OneNote and Word and Excel and Teams. It's all there. They're doing it all. And they're not inventing anything new. Their IP is in the way that they combine everything into one beautiful experience and how they really help people that own Microsoft software get the absolute, squeeze the absolute last drops out of the value of the software they've purchased. So I think that's amazing. And then the other thing, of course, is that every year it seems that when we go through our App Awards, we always give these guys an award because they consistently do great work. So I just wanted to give you a very brief taste of what it is that these guys have built and just show you how it is that it winds up working. And then I think we're getting very close, so we're going to hit the 5-minute mark in just a minute, and I want to see if there are any questions. And then, of course, there's a slide tax at the end where I have to tell you a few things because every session has to end that way. So flip back over to the demo machine very quickly, and you can now see that I am on the homepage of my Office account. And alongside all of my standard alongside all my other standard icons, I have this icon called Decisions, right? So that's one of the tools that I've got. And when I go into my calendar now, and I want to actually set up a meeting, I can actually edit this, and when I do, I can click on the Decisions tool, and it will automatically help me do all kinds of cool stuff to the meeting that makes my life a heck of a lot more productive. It helps me structure the meeting, and I'm hoping that it comes up in a second because I'm using their web-based client. So, for example, I can set the meeting up in Teams or in Outlook. And this is actually kind of cool because I can actually start saving my files that I associate with this with a specific channel associated with a group in Teams. So I can automatically say, okay, anything that's going to be part of this meeting is going to get stored in a SharePoint file that's associated with a Teams group or a Teams channel. I can also set up an agenda. So let's just say, for example, I'm going to put it in the general business development thing. I can immediately start assigning titles. So one, description is the number 1. And I can assign the agenda to a specific person. And there's a familiar thing, right? There's a person list. They probably could use a Graph Toolkit part now to do this in the future. But I'm sure they had to hand code that themselves when they built it, right? So I can very quickly, bring these things all together. And then when I need to, I can look at the entire agenda all in one place, and I can decide where I want to put stuff. So tasks, right? Do I want my tasks to appear as a list in Planner or in Excel? The decisions, that is to say the completed things that I've done, where I've actually taken an action and I consider that a decision has been made associated with a task in a meeting, and I can very, very quickly say, okay, do I want to just add this to a list in my 365 service, or do I want to put this again into Excel? Notes can be stored in either OneNote or in Word, depending upon your preferences, and minutes as well. So here we are, very, very quickly able to assign, delete, call these things decisions, right? Consider them done. But you can basically manage meetings very, very precisely, and you can create templates and repeat them. And this is a way that we actually look at this and say, you know what, this is a beautiful way of using the entire Microsoft 365 platform. Not everybody uses tasks, not everybody uses to-do. And I know a lot of people out there look at these things and say, like, well, how do we get everybody using all the things that we've got, that we've licensed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we see tools like this, and we think, wow, these guys really have thought all the way through creating these very beautiful processes that we can actually, that actually scale and work very, very nicely with our platform. So let me flip back, because I think we'll pretty much wrap up at this point. Let's see, what's next? Okay, so we did the demo. All right, so that's it. So just to recap, right? So we wanted to be able to define and describe the Microsoft Graph. We gave you a definition. We said it's the data and insights that describe the patterns of productivity in an organization, accessed through a unified API endpoint. We showed you a few things about building your first app, right? Get the Microsoft Graph Explorer, do a quick start, look at the learning sessions, and then certainly try the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. And then the third thing is discover some apps, right? There are all kinds of rich ways in which people use Microsoft Graph to build applications. Go out there and discover it. Use the library of apps that we've curated. We've got some videos online, obviously. And then there's just a catalog of apps in AppSource. So there's all kinds of cool ways to do that stuff. Everything that I've shown you, there's a link on this slide. If you want to take a picture, you can actually go and grab that stuff. So the toolkit repo on GitHub, as well as all the other links, are right there. So I'm going to see a lot of cameras up, so I'm going to wait until I see a lot of cameras go down. And by the way, this deck will be available in 48 hours. So if you also want to just go back and reference this session, you can do that. All right, and then these are the rest of the graph sessions this week. If you want to go deep on stuff, there's some great ones here. I would also recommend you take a picture of this. And yes, this is the deck tax part, but I'm glad we're doing this. All right, let's see. Cameras up, cameras up, cameras up. OK, cameras down. You, sir. No. All right. And then training, right? So we actually have new certifications in MS Learn for developers. This is brand new. It's still in beta. Right now, if you do this during Ignite, it's free. You can also get an 80% off code during the beta testing period. That's about a $200 value, and I want to make sure that you guys know to do that. The exams are great, and the value is really good, and if you take it during the beta period, your certification still counts. Also, join the Office Developer Program. The reason that's important is because if you need a demo tenant, a sandbox to play around with so that you can play with Graph Explorer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, do that. That's where you get one. And it is a E5 license with 25 seats. It is free. It auto-renews if we know that you're doing development work in it. If you're not doing dev work in it, it will expire. So just know that we intend for you to use it honestly, but we do a little checking. Please evaluate the session. So if you like the session, let me know. If you thought it was repetitive, let me know that too so that we can tweak things next year. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. I would appreciate your feedback. And this is where you get the slides and the content in 2 days. Thank you guys very, very much.